Hi, my name is Claudia and you are listening to the podcast Architektura Powinna. It's a Polish title with quite some international topics. It means architecture should. Therefore, we are wondering here what does architecture should and what shouldn't. In order to find out, I talk with various fascinating and inspiring people such as architects, urban designers, creators, writers, basically whoever has an interesting and valuable perspective on space that surrounds us and influence our well-being. It's a magical world, and today it's a special episode. This time I'm honored to be able to talk with an innovative architect, a humanitarian designer, a Japanese architect with a worldwide experience and recognition, Shigeru Ban.
As you know that after February 24th, many refugees coming to European country, especially in Poland. And I saw the TV news, refugees staying in the big gymnasium in Poland without any privacy. So I proposed my Polish architect friend to make this paper partition system.
Shigeru Ban was born in Tokyo, and after studying architecture in United States, he opened an office in Tokyo, then in Paris and New York. He has designed projects worldwide, from private houses, exhibitions, pavilions to offices or large-scale museums. He's known for his innovative work with paper as building material, particularly recycled cardboard tubes used to quickly and efficiently accommodate disaster victims. That will be our main topic of the conversation, but besides, it's good to know that Shigeru Ban built for example, the Japanese pavilion for the Expo 2000 in Hanover. Good to check out this design. But also good to notice, for example, the cardboard cathedral in New Zealand, Centre Pompidou Metz in France, Tamidia new office building in Zurich in Switzerland, and many, many more. In 2014, he was given the Pritzker Architecture Prize, the most prestigious prize in architecture. He was appreciated for his innovative material use and his dedication to humanitarian efforts around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, very direct answers, rigid conclusions, and very humble and clear work approach. Let's start the conversation with Shigeru Ban. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I understand that you are calling from Paris, correct?
Right.
But you have the office also in Tokyo and
Yes.
in New York.
Yes.
Doesn't mean that you are constantly traveling?
Yes, I'm constantly traveling.
Did the global pandemic change something the way you work?
Yeah, while the pandemic, I couldn't travel as many as it's necessary.
Did something change after the COVID, after the borders are open again?
Yeah, just I tried to bring back to the normal life, but during the pandemic, many projects cancelled and postponed. So I'm less traveling. I used to travel before pandemic every week between Tokyo and Paris for 15 years, but now it's less.
That's maybe better for the health and for being in one time zone, I imagine.
I don't know. I need to travel all the time.
This mixture is also a great reflection of your experience as a designer, as an architect. You are Japanese, you were born in Tokyo, but you studied in United States, first in Southern California Institute of Architecture in Los Angeles, and later at the Cooper Union School of Architecture in New York. Your work is frequently described as a blend of traditional Japanese architecture with
It's not
elements.
true. Not true. I never studied architecture in Japan. I don't want to refer to Japanese architecture.
I guess there is a bigger truth in the blend of American modernism and contemporary aesthetics.
I don't know. It's depending on the critics. I don't care.
You don't care about the critics?
No, I don't care how I'm understood. My influence. It doesn't matter.
But Does this international experience influence the way you work and design?
It's not only myself. Everybody is similar. Everybody influenced everywhere and internationally. So nothing special.
So it's always about the location of the certain project.
Well, yeah, respecting the context is most important for design.
I wanted to talk about your experience and working with the material as paper and cardboard. You were the first architect who constructed a house primarily using only the paper. That was your own weekend house.
It's not only, it's a structure is made of paper tube.
Was it the first structure that indeed you made in the paper, or were you already experimenting
That's the
before?
first one. I got the government permission as a permanent building with a paper tube structure.
What does it mean, governmental permission? So I understand that it wasn't
Because I
allowed.
have built, I had built the other building without permission as an experiment, which also still remain as a permanent building, but without government permission as an experiment.
Was it because there were certain regulations that the house made from paper?
Yeah, because any country has a regulation. In order to use unusual material like paper, we have to test and we have to get government permission in any country.
But I would like to understand the beginning of your experience when using paper. Could you elaborate a bit more? What was the first exploration and fascination?
First exploration was the use in order to replace wood for Alberto exhibition 1986. I used paper tube first time for the interior. Then I start testing to use for the building structure.
And how do you test the paper as a building material?
Well, it's just like the testing like wood and the concrete and steel is same. Just we have to work with the engineer and they just test tension, compression, bending. So it's the same as testing other material.
Yeah. You were also mentioning that it's very universal and very common material, easy to work.
It's not easy to work. It's just the we can find the manufacturer almost everywhere in the world.
What are the other advantages of the material?
It's lightweight and inexpensive.
What about like making it fireproof and waterproof?
It's the same like wood. When the zoning and regulation require the fire protection, we have to fire protect like wood. It's just like wood. When we build the area where the fire protection is not required, we can just build without the fire protecting the paper.
How much of the paper use as a building material is used currently in all the projects in the office?
No, only occasionally.
Mainly for the shelters and in emergency architecture?
No, many of the permanent building also built in paper, but not everything because the paper, getting the permission is very difficult.
I can imagine maybe in Japan a bit easier as you already have experience in that.
No. Actually, the regulation become more difficult in Japan, so it's easier to use in other countries than Japan.
What would be the country that it's relatively easy?
Europe is relatively easier because for example, like in France, we have to work with a proof engineer. If proof engineer accepted it, we don't have to get the government permission. So I built few structure here in France. I didn't have to get the government permission as long as I get the permission from proof engineer.
I've read that Shigeru Ban grew up in a wooden house, and even though his parents were not related to architecture, they often renovated their house. Therefore, he had the chance to watch the work of the repairmen or carpenters. He had the chance to play with the wood and enjoy the arts and crafts later in the school. He studied architecture in US, first in California, then in New York, where he attended famously experimental Cooper Union School. He studied there under the teacher, the famous architect John Hayduk. He was known for his interest in exploration of basic geometric elements and structures and shapes, some cubes, grids, frames, and curves. Hayduk inspired Shigeru Ban to very large degree. Shigeru Ban himself started to study basic geometrical forms and their usage in space. Only 1 year after he gained the title of an architect, he started his office in Tokyo in 1985. But before that, he's been to Europe, where he was discovering the work of Alvar Aalto, a famous Finnish architect and designer. He's known for his multi-scale approach, a simple but elegant space division, and huge concern for materials. If you don't know Alvar Aalto, definitely please check him out. When Shigeru Ban started the office, he didn't have obviously much experience, any experience basically, but he kept experimenting with natural materials such as wood, soil, cardboard, paper. Even though he didn't have any portfolio, he was commissioned for several exhibition projects. He also began to work on a series of houses that served as case studies for different design elements that he was playing with. It's actually very interesting how Shigeru Ban never talks about ecology, sustainability, and environmentally friendly architecture. And don't get me wrong, like his approach is very sustainable as we would describe today. He just doesn't describe his work in these terms. He just acts that it's very obvious, so it doesn't need to be discussed. He says he basically hates wasting. So when he uses local material for his structures, he produces as little building waste as possible. Or sometimes even something that is considered a waste, he would use as a building material. So he basically follows the logic and he just does the right thing rather than being driven by the latest eco trends or ecological requirements. In this interview and in lots of articles, actually the paper, the cardboard, paper tubes are primarily highlighted. But there are many other local and easily available, cheap, durable materials that can contribute to the houses. The houses for earthquake victims in Japan, Turkey, and India. So in 1995, 1999, and 2001, contain such materials as beer crates loaded with sandbags, for example. It contained area timber or rubble. Actually, just after an enormous earthquake in the city, the most common material is rubble, parts of destroyed buildings that can be immediately reused. In Onagawa in Japan, Shigeru Ban's crew used shipping containers for houses. With other situations, he uses timber, plywood, plastic sheets, thatch. It really depends what is accessible on location. For him, there is no difference also between permanent and temporary structures. Some of his structures for victims of the earthquake, for example in India, became actually permanent, and that's the biggest and the best help that can be brought. So I'm asking then, how the paper material ages? Does it lose the quality with the time? Is it better than a concrete building?
You know that in the library there is many books older than 1,000 years old, but no concrete building older than the 200 years. Concrete is much difficult material for the durability. And also there are no example of the old building in concrete. But timber building, there's more than 1,000 years old in many temples. So there is the example already. But concrete building, we don't know how long they're going to last. The many of the concrete building is not the permanent; it's a very temporary. Many of commercial building, when the developer buy the land, destroy the existing concrete building. So most of the commercial building is a temporary, even concrete. It's just about the prejudice of the people.
Mm-hmm. Because you said that you are not doing anything new, you are just using the material that it's already around us, and it's basically everywhere. That's why it's a great system for immediate need.
Mhm.
The first time that you proposed the paper tube shelters was for the refugees in Rwanda in 1994. Could you explain how the paper tube shelters there were the right solution for this crisis?
The United Nations was making the shelter out of local timber. And Rwanda situation, there's over 2 million refugees cutting trees to make a shelter in order to put the plastic sheet given by United Nations. And then this became very serious deforestation. And then they provide them aluminum pipes. But aluminum is very expensive material. They sold them out for money and cut the trees again. So that's why providing aluminum was not good solution to stop the deforestation. But that was timing I proposed to make a shelter out of cardboard tube. So they accepted it.
And then how was it installed there? What was the next step?
Next step, I made a prototype and I installed it in country around Rwanda.
But also, I'm curious what was happening with the shelters and its inhabitants after certain amount of time.
Well, they have to go back to home as soon as possible. So normally they don't stay more than 1 year, but recently there's many refugees stayed much longer. But that time in Rwanda, people could go back to home like within 1 year. So,
All right. And then the shelters could have been reused.
no, I don't think so.
But there were also the examples that the certain shelters or the certain systems that you proposed could be reused.
It's much easier to dismantle instead of the storing for certain situations, especially like that kind of country. Transportation is very expensive. Storage is expensive. Shelter shouldn't be stored. It has to be made when it's necessary.
You also proved that it's not only about the houses, only the dwellings, the temporary dwellings, but after the earthquake in Kobe in Japan 1 year later, so 1995, you also replaced a church with a new paper dome, with a new sanctuary made of paper. It was constructed very fast. It was constructed by the volunteers.
Student, yeah.
How important is this participations of the students, volunteers, but also the local communities?
Because we don't have money to hire the professional. So advantage working with student is their free labor,
Hmm.
and also is a part of their education.
Yeah, but how important is to engage the local community in building it?
No, we don't ask the local community to help. They are busy enough for their own life after the disaster. We never ask the local community to help us. Always I bring the local volunteer student.
Okay, but I imagine you talk with the victims, with the refugees. I mean, you talk about their needs.
Yeah. We ask the local people what they need.
How this communication looks like usually from your experience?
No, but this church was asked by this priest, not its local community. This was request of the priest of the destroyed church.
If you talk with the victims and refugees, how do you approach these conversations? How do you approach the whole process?
It's a depend. It's depend. Not always we need to talk with the community. Sometimes we ask by the priest or UN without talking with the community. But when I built the reconstruction of the houses, villages, in Sri Lanka, we had to talk with Islamic resident because they have a different lifestyle. But normally we are not the one to talk with the community. There is some local group of the people who ask us to do it, and they are the one to talk with community.
Okay. You are there to do your job as a designer and as an architect.
Yeah, but as I said, sometimes when I was working in Sri Lanka, I joined in the community meeting.
And what do you learn from such meetings?
Well, in Muslim people, when some male guests come to visit, they like to separate room with men and women. That was first time I experienced that kind of lifestyle.
Yeah, there are many cultural differences that can be shocked at first, but are also important to take into consideration later
Yeah.
when designing a shelter, even if it's temporary shelter. But it has to respect all the cultural differences.
Hmm.
2004, you proposed for the first time, you used for the first time the paper partition system. It's a very simple paper tube system, modular system.
Oh, no, it was not paper tube. It was paper honeycomb panel.
And could you describe it a little bit more precisely?
You can find the paper honeycomb inside of the door. It's a very common material. Then after that, I made a partition out of tube. It's a post beam. But first one, 2004, was wall, paper honeycomb walls,
And what's the main goal of such a system? What it brings to the what it
giving
brings
privacy to the evacuees.
is that the most important need?
Most basic human right.
Could you say that does architecture can bring hope?
I don't know. I don't know.
What are the most important characteristics of the shelter? You mentioned the privacy.
This paper partition system is a system to provide privacy to each families in a big evacuation facility like gymnasium.
And I can imagine like these post disaster settlements and evacuation places are very chaotic and unpredictable and poor and lacking indeed the basic human needs, as you mentioned. What are these key elements when you consider and acknowledge when starting designing such a simple shelter, such a house for refugees, for victims? What are these key elements?
It has to be very flexible to adjust the size depending on the number of the families. And also, this has to be easy to build quickly. Also, it has to be easy to dismantle. And the paper is easy to recycle.
Hmm.
But it shouldn't be too close. It has to be lightweight, openable, flexible. Yeah, official people who take care of the evacuation facilities, they don't want to make something too rigid because they have to check whether the people are fine or not, and every day. So this has to be uh, good enough to give the enough privacy, but shouldn't be too rigid structure for the space.
Is there a space for design when it comes to fulfilling these basic human needs?
What do you mean design?
Does such a shelter have to be beautiful?
Everything architect make has to be beautiful.
Very good answer, I think.
Because we cannot make something ugly.
And what are the biggest risks when creating a shelter for people in need?
There's no risk. There's no risk. But difficulty is the fundraising is the most difficult thing.
What do you mean? That it's not enough
Because we need the money to do it. But if we wait for the fundraising, it's gonna be too late.
because the creation comes before the funding, even.
No, necessity, not creation. Necessity is immediate. So we cannot wait that we get enough fund. So fundraising is the most difficult one.
How does this process look like normally from your experience?
Well, I just spend my own money to start. Then I look for the fund later.
After a few temporary housing projects, you also established the NGO, the Voluntary Architects Network, that I think it's very important to
Yes.
mention here during our conversation. You provide this assistance in Turkey, India, Sri Lanka, China, Italy, Haiti, and many more places because the disasters, natural disasters, wars happen in many different areas. But also, these disasters really differ from each other. And the system that you are
Yes.
talking that needs to be flexible, I can imagine it also has to be very flexible in terms of different
Flexible and
adaptable.
adaptable.
Exactly.
Yeah. Because the available material is different depending on the site, depending on the country.
So the customization also matters. I think that also it's included in the flexibility, right?
Yes, that's right. That's why I have to go there first to find out what is available, what is the climate like, what is lifestyle. So it has to be adjusted every time depending on the condition.
Are you also then collaborating with the local designers, local
Yeah,
architects?
that's not designer, the architects and student. Always I contact the local school and the architect and professors, and they make a team for us.
I was thinking that also after a certain disaster, the help comes very fast and the shelters are also created quite fast. But then what about the urban aspect, the urban design in the disaster relief settlements? Is there a risk of the very spontaneous and random layout of this settlement? Is there even a time to think about it, to design it?
I normally work with very small communities. Government and UN organization has to take care of the massive people. And always there is some small minority communities looking for the special solutions. So I always look for the minority group of people to help. Also, that my ability is quite limited. That's why I cannot take care of the massive people. So always I look for the minority people who need some special help.
And then I understand that there is no risk in this very spontaneous, unplanned
Yeah,
village.
less risk and less yeah than the it's easier than the big massive community.
Also, I can imagine, I mean, the disasters and the catastrophes are constantly happening in the world. And I can imagine you must receive plenty of messages and emails regarding help.
Yeah, not plenty, but sometimes I'm asked to come, but also sometimes I go there without any invitation. So it's a both.
Did it happen also with Poland and helping Ukrainian refugees
Yes,
recently? Could you elaborate
yes.
a bit more on that?
As you know that after February 24th, many refugees coming to European country, especially in Poland. And I saw the TV news, refugees staying in the big gymnasium in Poland without any privacy. So I proposed my Polish architect friend to make this paper partition system. And he immediately looked for the manufacturers, and also he convinced the mayor of the some cities, and also that I have the former student, Polish student. He now he's a professor of the university, and he get out a student. So we made us a team immediately. Uba Trama and Jazzy
Jerzy Łądka. Yeah, that's
Jazzy Latka. He was my former student, and he is a professor of Wrocław University Science and Technology.
correct. And what's your thought on how it was organized for Ukrainian refugees? And do you have any more plans related to that topic?
Yeah, I also made a prototype with Jersey's student in Wrocław University of Science Technology. We call it SHS, styrofoam house system. It's made of very lightweight foam core, which is normally used for the insulation, and we just paint cover by glass fiber reinforced plastic to make a structural panel, but very well insulated, lightweight. So just they spent 2 weeks to prepare, and they spent 2 days to assemble the one house by the student. And then we are planning to rebuild this in Lviv, Ukraine, next April.
Mm-hmm.
But now, because there is a energy crisis, it might be necessary to prepare the panel in Poland to transfer to Ukraine.
Is there then a plan to make it more something more permanent?
It's a permanent, but the next one is going to be two-story. The one we built in September was single story, but the one we are building is two-story.
And that was in Lviv, in Ukraine already.
Yes, yes,
Okay,
yes,
right. Are you also collaborating with Ukrainian architects?
yes.
And how is the funding there?
I'm the one to look for the funding, but also I try to ask. We are asking Japanese government to help us. Also, we sent 190 stoves from Japan. It's a firewood stove,
Mm-hmm.
which you can warm the house and also you can use for the cooking.
All right. And that was already installed in the houses, or it's gonna be?
I think so. I saw a few weeks ago, we saw the photo that the local resident received. You can see on my website. They looks very happy receiving it, but the behind the photos, the all the building is destroyed. It's a sad photo I saw, but now the local Ukrainian NGO help us to deliver those stoves.
Mm-hmm. And if you could change something in this whole process of constructing the local shelters, other than funding and the financial issue, what would you change? What would you like to improve and make even better and smoother?
Well, normally after the disaster or war is finished, the contractor is going to be very busy and the building material is going to be expensive. That is why I wanted to introduce the building system without depending on a general contractor, without depending on the normal building materials. So this is the one. So to make something inexpensively, quickly, without the normal contractor.
I understand that is something then that is already happening. It's not a wish.
Yeah, as I said, in September we built the first prototype with the Wrocław University
Mm-hmm.
in their campus.
Plus, it's also interesting that the war is not over and this project already
Yeah,
started.
but we have to start preparing. And also, when I met the mayor of the Lviv, he is willing to start reconstruction of the country from Lviv. He want to prepare.
So Shigeru Ban offered his help to Ukraine back in March, and the cardboard pipe partition system that he developed was installed in schools, in shopping centers, in other places where Ukrainian escaping the war got to live. The system has been used in shelters in Lviv, in western Ukraine. It was used in Poland, in France. It was also a plan to install it in Germany and Slovakia, so maybe that already happened. The partition system is for the inside privacy, but the second project that he mentioned is a quick chip housing. So, as he mentioned, now contractors have quite lots of work and building materials keep on getting more expensive. So he suggested creating buildings that would not require expensive material and special skills of assembling it. So, for example, students could build such a building in 2 weeks, and students did build such a building in 2 weeks. Moreover, the actual assembling of the house takes actually 2 days. It is prefabricated panel system. The structural panel is made of foam core, the styrofoam, which normally is used as insulation or inside the cardboard box packing. From outside, it's protected with a glass fiber and plastic. So the panel itself is very lightweight and well insulated. Shigeru Ban said that this is the technology that is very usual to make a boat, and he just implemented in the building construction. He also stated that temporary housing is a bad solution. Actually, what we need is to quickly build something that can be turned into a permanent home, because that's a long-term help that it's needed. That was the topic of the partition system and houses for Ukrainians. But Shigeru Ban doesn't do only voluntary work, voluntary architecture, does not focus only on emergency architecture. He also designed office buildings, museums, pavilions, public use buildings. So now let's talk about the clients, the approach towards architecture, towards the profession of architecture, and his work. You said that you are tired of working for privileged people, and most of the time, architects work for clients who use architecture to express their power. Doesn't mean that you are very disappointed how the profession of architecture looks nowadays?
No, I also work for the privileged people making monument. Also, I enjoy that. Just I want to make a balance, but I'm not rejecting to work for privileged people to make monument. I also make a monument.
So it's mostly to keep it in balance.
Yes, exactly.
So how important is for you the contribution to a society?
Well, it's a kind of part of my own training, working in a difficult situation.
Because the training consists of really going from one extreme
Right.
into another. If you also work for very rich, privileged people, and you contribute to a society with your humanitarian side.
Yes, I agree.
I'm curious then, how do you define success in architecture? What's your definition?
We don't need to succeed.
What do we need to do then?
We just continue working. We don't have to look for the succession.
But with what kind of goal and vision?
There's no goal. Just we keep working.
Yeah, that's very humble approach.
If you look for the goal, it's boring. If you reach the goal, then it's the end of your life.
Well, the goal can be also the social contribution, for example, and to
But
indeed
the goal,
keep this
just
balance.
keep working.
Do I understand good that you perceive architecture as a tool to develop, to make buildings, rather than searching for a deep meaning behind architecture?
Maybe you're right. I'm not thinking about the meaning behind it. Just I'm just finding idea and solution for different challenges coming. So there is no theoretical deep thinking behind. Just keep building.
Although looking at the architecture of Shigeru Ban offices, you might think that there is a quite big meaning and the story that the building tells, the relay.
That's this meaning and story will be built as a result. No, we are not working for the meaning, or it's coming later as a result, naturally.
When I was talking with Daniel Libeskind, he said that architecture is a storytelling profession, that the building always tells you a story. Would you agree with that?
I have a totally different attitude.
What is your attitude?
We're just working whatever it comes in front of me.
All right. And who inspires you? or what kind of places inspire you?
Kyoto.
Fraiotto. Why is that?
I was interested in his thought of saying of the making maximum space with the minimum materials and minimum effort, and the way he used the material and the way he do the so-called form finding
Mm-hmm.
was something I'm very interested in, and I was very lucky to collaborate with him for the Japanese pavilion for Hanover Expo.
Yeah. And is there any place that recently you found a very inspiring and memorable?
Well, I beat the place by accident, by chance. For example, in Japan, I'm working for the small competition. In this small town, I just happened to visit a traditional Japanese house, which was very inspiring,
Mm-hmm.
with very interesting carpentry works and so on. So always I try to visit some interesting historical building when I go there for projects.
And do you think there is any translation later how you design and how you work with the new buildings? Isn't it this inspiration subconsciously
Yeah,
floating?
subconsciously there must be many inspirations. Yes.
That's why maybe what I've read and what I mentioned in the very beginning when some critics describe your work, that's why maybe they mention also a traditional Japanese architecture in terms of very undefined.
I think that they have this prejudice because I'm Japanese. I think it's totally wrong.
Okay, then I hope they're gonna listen to this conversation and they're not
It's just
gonna write
that
it
they have
anymore.
prejudice because I'm Japanese, and people think that Japanese people make a building out of paper, and people think paper is weak. So that's all prejudice.
Well, thank you for this conversation and for your time. It was very interesting.
Thank you, because I really appreciate you study a lot of my previous project and so on. But that maybe I must have answered some not as you expected or not your wishes, but
I think that what makes conversations even more interesting that I don't know how you're going to answer because I had idea how you might answer, but I'm very surprised that your main statement is I just keep working, and I guess that would be also the advice to others. Thank you.
thank you. Nice talking to you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Let me know what you think about the talk and what are your thoughts on the emergency architecture that Shigeru Ban and Voluntary Architects Network VAN contributes to. Let's bring a huge attention to humanitarian emergency architecture because it doesn't matter when you're going to listen to this episode, there is a natural or non-natural disaster happening right now, and there are people, victims that have just lost a house or were forced to leave their homes and they are in need for immediate shelter or housing or public facility. So let's bring this attention for more help and engagement of designers, architects, urban planners, students to really pay attention and be conscious what's happening and maybe be engaged in work, for example, in disaster areas. That's it for today. Thank you for listening to this episode. It was a very special episode for me. I hope also for you. You can find me on my social media channels such as Instagram under the name Architektura Powinna. All right. Have a great day. Keep working and see you in the next episode.